Hello everyone, in this video I'm going to talk about one approach that you could take to answer the power, authority and legitimacy essay, which is worth 20 marks. This is the first 20-mark essay that you'll attempt for the political theory unit, which is unit 1 of higher politics. And it can feel like quite a complex essay. And so what I thought I would do today is to walk you through one way that you could tackle this essay. So let's look at the essay question in more detail. The question you've been set is: the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy all remain highly relevant in the 21st century. Discuss with reference to the ideas of Stephen Lukes and Max Weber. Now, Lukes and Weber are the two theorists that are integral to this first topic in Unit 1. You can bring in the ideas of other theorists, that's absolutely no problem, and compare them to Lukes and Weber. That would be great too. But you must discuss Lukes and Weber because the question demands it of you. And without discussing them, you can't actually pass this essay. So I'll talk about how you can include those theories in a minute, but let's look at the first part of the question. The question refers to the three concepts upon which this whole unit is built: power, authority, and legitimacy. And you'll know from your own understanding of current affairs and your reading from the course notes and the tasks that you've done, that these three concepts can be interlinked and they can all coexist in some political systems. And yet there are some political systems where you might have one and not the other two, or you might have two and not one. So we can't just assume that if you have a political system in one country or one state, that you will always have power, authority, and legitimacy. Because as we know, there are perhaps examples of political systems where a leader has power and authority, but has gained that through illegitimate or non-democratic means. Or there may be examples of political leaders that have legitimate authority, and yet they have no power, perhaps because they've been exiled from their own country. So let's move on. So where do we begin? We begin by looking at the prior knowledge, so the knowledge that you've accumulated and the understanding and the skills that you've accumulated up to this point. So we know that we've covered Lukes' theory of power, and you have 3 e-textbooks that I made for you that you can access to help you get to grips with Lukes' theory of power. You've also had a look at Weber's types of authority, and there is a 12-mark essay that I've provided for you, which goes through Weber's type of authority, and it also provides you some understanding of how you might analyze this and other theories of power, authority, and legitimacy, because this is key in higher politics. You need to be able to, provide knowledge and examples and evidence, but you also need to provide a higher order level skill of writing, which is analytical commentary. So when we talk about analytical commentary, what we're talking about is you commenting on the knowledge that you've written down. So when you write a piece of knowledge or an example, you might want to think, well, so what? Why is that important? Why is that significant? How is it relevant to the question? And then write that. Because we can't just write a list of facts, because while that's important and essential to this essay, without commenting on it, we don't add that extra dimension that's required at this level. Now, if we go back then to relevant examples, you'll notice that the essay requires you to talk about the 21st century. So even though it might be tempting to include historic examples, and sometimes those historic examples are excellent to explain these 3 concepts, they would not be valid and would not be given any marks at higher politics. So do look carefully at any question that you're given on the power, authority, and legitimacy unit, just in case the dates are different. But 21st century, you always know that you can provide up-to-date examples. It will never ask for historic examples, but it may just ask for current examples. And so that's what we're going to do. So you could consider examples of power, authority, and legitimacy in the news. Depending on when you access this, there may have been new examples that have emerged. Right now, I'm recording this on August the 20th, 2021. And so if you're accessing it in this month or next month, you'll be fully aware of the situation in Afghanistan and the takeover of the Taliban. So think carefully about that. It's a fantastic example of the way in which power, authority, and legitimacy are interlinked, and how the Taliban are not legitimate leaders of Afghanistan. And when we talk about legitimacy, it's usually linked to democratic processes. Now, it may be that the Taliban will conduct elections, whether they are democratic or not remains to be seen. But they have power and authority currently in Afghanistan, but no real legitimacy. But then you've got to think, is legitimacy a concept that means that actually you don't have to have democratic elections if the people of the country believe that you are the legitimate leader, that you are the rightful leader? And that doesn't always mean that there has been a democratic election to put those people into power. So consider that. And this is all an analysis. This is all thinking and going beyond the fact, okay, and thinking deeply about whether these examples are relevant and maybe how they link to Luke's and Weber's theories as well. Okay, so how is the essay marked? Now, of course, you want to know this because you want to know how you can pick up the maximum number of marks. So there are 8 marks for knowledge. And when we talk about knowledge, we're talking about fact-based knowledge, and we're also talking about detailed examples or development of that knowledge. So in total, there are 8 marks for knowledge, and you can get that in a range of different ways. But if I was writing this, I would always write a knowledge point, so a fact-based point or a description or an explanation followed by an example. And I would try and do that at least 4 times to make sure I hit all those knowledge marks. So whenever you're writing a knowledge point, try to give an example. You won't struggle in this essay to find examples. But if you do, please just email me and I'll give you a hand. There are also 6 marks for analysis. So I've talked about analysis before, but just as a recap, this is commentary. These are counterbalance points. So if you're talking about Luke's and you're saying how it's relevant, his theories are relevant in this situation, you might offer a counterbalance point and say, however, in this situation, Luke's theories are limited in their relevance or importance. Okay, so when we're talking about counterbalance, you're talking about arguments for and against, in this case, the theories of power, authority, and legitimacy. Sorry. You can follow the knowledge points with these analytical comments. So if I was thinking about some kind of formula, if you like that approach, I would write my K point, which is the fact or the description. I would then provide a detailed example, and then I would analyze that. So it would be knowledge plus, or a knowledge example, and then analysis. And I would do that multiple times in the paragraph. Now, at the end of the essay, you may find that you have time to write a separate conclusion. That's great. You can absolutely do that. If you would prefer to conclude at the end of each paragraph with a mini conclusion that links back to the question, then that is also fine at Higher Politics. But please try to move beyond summative conclusions, so where you're summarizing what you've already said, because you can't be double credited, and that feels repetitious when you do that. So try not to do that. If you read your essay back to yourself and you think that it sounds like you've said that already, just try and reword it in a different way. Conclusions can be quite tricky to get right, and to avoid that summative approach. But if you really want to try and push your essay writing to the next level, try to think of different ways to express your point. But don't worry if you don't quite get that in the first essay. You've got an entire academic year to get to grips with that. And when you write your essay and I give you feedback on that, I'll give you specific, detailed feedback on how to improve any aspect, whether it's knowledge, analysis, or your conclusions. Okay, and the final 2 marks are given for structure. So this can feel like a difficult one to quantify, but basically what you need is a clear structure to the essay, and I'm going to go through how to do that in a minute. You need to clearly explain the issue, and you need to have a clear and consistent line of argument. So you need to think before you even begin writing, do you think that the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy are highly relevant in the 21st century? So in your mind, you've got to think, well, yes, I do, or I don't. And then you need to think why you think they are relevant or they're not relevant. So, but even before you begin, because if you're not sure about that before you start, you will not have a clear and consistent line of argument, because you frankly don't know your line of argument. Okay. Now, one thing I will say about line of argument is there's no right or wrong line of argument. Whatever you think is fine as long as you can justify it. So let's start with the introduction then. So if I was planning this, I would think, right, well, I'm going to include 3 steps to this process. So I'm going to have a topic sentence that gets me into the introduction. And what I do then is I use the words of the question. You can see on the screen there, I write, it could be argued that the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy are highly relevant in the 21st century. So that would be my line of argument. I think they are highly relevant. Okay. Now, that doesn't mean that you have to write that. You could say that they are not highly relevant or they are irrelevant. It doesn't matter. Okay. So I'm not marking your viewpoint, I'm marking your argumentation. What's your argument? Can you back it up? Okay, so to be absolutely clear with politics is quite a personal preference. It's quite a personal, we offer personal interpretations. That's absolutely fine. So I'm not going to grade you down if I don't agree with you politically. So please don't fear that. We don't have to agree. And in fact, I quite like it when we don't agree because then we can challenge each other. So once I've written that as my line of argument, I'm going to then provide a brief overview of what I understand about the 3 concepts. What is power? What is authority? What is legitimacy? And how they link to the question. So how are they relevant? You could also give an example if you want. You could talk about how they link to each other or that they don't all have to exist at the same time. And give an example of that. So there are lots of ways you can approach this. I've never read candidates who have the same introduction. So please don't worry, there's no actual formula to this. This is just some of the things you could include. And then finally, I would offer a brief outline of the theories of Lukes and Weber to show how they're linked to the question as well, because the question demands that you talk about Lukes and Weber, so it would make sense to reference their work. So if you're thinking about length of introduction, I would say a short paragraph. So you're looking at 10, 12 lines if you're maybe typing, but don't go overboard because you want to get straight into that main body of the essay where the bulk of the marks can be picked up. But in the introduction, it's important to outline your line of argument so that you can start getting the marker thinking in their mind that you have provided a line of argument that they can then follow to see if you sustain it and continue it throughout the main body. Okay, then paragraphs 1 and 2. What I might do, and this is only one approach, it's not the only approach, is I might then include a discussion of the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy. So, explain what they are. What do they mean? How are they relevant to each other? How are they irrelevant to each other? So this is quite a free flow writing paragraph, I think, or 2 paragraphs. If you want to break this up, that's absolutely fine, because they want you to talk about the concepts. You give examples of this. You can provide analytical commentary of the examples. This doesn't have to link to Lukes and Weber because, of course, you're going to write about them a bit later. So this could be where you just really express yourself and what you think about these concepts. You can put a mini conclusion. So something like, while the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy are highly relevant, there are many examples, and you can give them, where legitimacy does not coexist with power and authority, or power and authority doesn't always exist with legitimacy. Whatever you want to do. Okay. Then paragraph 3, I would then go and discuss Lukes' theory of power, show how it's linked to legitimacy and authority, because that's what the question is asking you. Remember, Lukes' theory is on power. The question is asking you about power, authority, and legitimacy, how they interlink and how they're relevant. I'd then give some 21st century examples, and then provide analytical commentary on those. And when I'm writing my analytical commentary, I might say things like, this is significant because, or this is important because, or this is relevant because. Now, sometimes when you're writing analysis, using the word because makes you justify your view, which then turns it from, basic kind of fact writing to a higher order level skill of analysis. You can offer counterbalance points and then a mini conclusion linked back to the question, if you choose to do that. Okay, then we move to paragraph 4, where you're going to discuss Weber's types of authority and show how this is linked to legitimacy and power. Because remember, the question asks you about the 3 concepts. Weber, his theory is about authority, so you need to show how that is linked to power and legitimacy. Now, this is quite complex, so don't worry if you're finding this challenging. It is challenging. It's a desirable challenge. These concepts are difficult. And a lot of people think that power, authority, and legitimacy are the same thing and that they all coexist. But you, as a politics student, know different. And what we want to do is try and express how we know that's different and how we know that they don't always coexist and the different manifestations or demonstrations of power, authority, and legitimacy. Remember that power from your reading and maybe your general knowledge as well can come in many forms. You can have political power, economic power, gender power, race power, military power. So you can even go deeper into that in that direction if you want to. So this is quite a free essay to go off in, as long as you are talking about Lukes and Weber and the three concepts. And again, just like with the Lukes paragraph, you would offer analytical commentary about relevance, significance, importance of his theory. So think about it. Are Weber's theories relevant in perhaps democratic states, but not authoritarian states? Are Weber's theories more relevant in earlier times, so not necessarily as relevant in the 21st century as they were in the 20th century or the 19th century? Have a think. And then a mini conclusion, should you wish. And then we get to the conclusion. If you haven't added any mini conclusions throughout the main body of the essay, you can then write a conclusion. If you have put mini conclusions throughout, you don't need to do this. But for some candidates, they feel like they would like to add a conclusion in just to round it off. And that's good practice. That's what you would have to do at university if that's your destination. So the conclusion has 4 points available. And so for me, I would then be aiming to write 4 separate points so I could then help the marker, which in this case will be me, but in the summer will be an external marker. They're looking for 4 separate points. So I'm going to give you an idea how you could do that without being summative, without summarizing what you've already said. So I would talk about the relationship between the concepts of power, authority, and legitimacy in a different way that I've said it before. I would discuss examples of where power, authority, and legitimacy are interlinked or not interlinked, and then comment about that. So again, not writing the same thing as I'd written before. I might then compare Lukes and Weber's theories, and you could do this a couple of times in the conclusion. You can maybe say, well, Lukes' theory is more relevant than Weber's theory in the 21st century because. Now, I'm not saying that's true. I'm just saying that if you think that, you can write that. If you think Weber's theories are more relevant in the 21st century than when compared to Lukes, then write that. You could also comment on other political theorists. So actually, do you think that perhaps Marx's view on power, authority, and legitimacy are more relevant than Lukes and Weber? Now, that is entirely fine if you want to argue that, and you could absolutely back that up. And link it to capitalism, because of course power, authority, and legitimacy has a strong link to economic power. So if you want to go down that route, you are absolutely welcome to do that. Okay, and then you could also comment on any similarities and differences between within Lukes and Weber's theories, and as I said, bring in other theorists' views if you want to, as long as you're not repeating points, because you cannot be double credited. Okay, now you've got to start with a plan. So the reason why you need to start with a plan is to organize your thoughts and your argumentation. As I said, if you don't have a line of argument, you're going to find it really difficult to pick up those structure points if you don't know what you're going to argue. Okay, now take time to think about it. And it might be when you're making your notes, your argument, you start to shift your argument and you think, well, actually, I think it's not that relevant in the 21st century anymore, or it is more relevant. So you have a think. So to recap, you need to try and make sure you've organized your notes under the following headings. So definitions of power as one heading, definitions of authority as a second, and definitions of legitimacy as a third, and provide examples and commentary about that. Then you need detailed notes about Lukes' theory of power and Weber's theory of authority. So look back over the class notes you've made, or if you're learning solely online, look back through the notes you've made and any comments you've made in the forum, and begin. It can be difficult to begin, but my tip is to start by breaking it down into manageable chunks, and that would be what's on the screen just now. And that will help you to structure your argumentation and enable you to hopefully access all of the marks available. Now, remember, this is your first essay, so don't expect you to get full marks in the first essay. That's not what we're aiming for. What we're aiming for is to just begin and just to see where we are and see where there are areas for improvement and praise, of course. So what I will do is once you submit your essay, I will have a look through and I will show you where areas could be improved. I'll show you examples of where you've really hit that analysis or knowledge or conclusion or structure marks, so you can see what you're doing well and where you need to improve so you can gain a higher mark or a similar mark in the next essay. Okay, any questions, please just email me, and best of luck.